What's the most wholesome experience you've had with a stranger? I was in the hospital, knowing I'd be there for at least a week and possibly more. I was sick of hospital food, so I went downstairs to go across the street to the hospital subway. I was pretty far back in the hospital. 6th floor, backside of the building, labyrinth of staircases and hallways to get out the front door. The walk from there to subway took almost 15 minutes, even though it was just across the street. I waited in line, got up to the counter to order, and realized I'd left my wallet in my room. I ordinarily keep my wallet in my back pocket, but there was no need to in the hospital since I was in my room most of the time. I was exhausted mentally by that point from the stay, told them I'd forgotten the wallet, and turned to make the trek all the way there and back again. All of a sudden, a nurse behind me bought my food for me, saving me the trip and the money. I thanked him profusely. That was years ago, but I will never forget that act of kindness. I was traveling from the south of England to the north of Scotland to start a new job the next morning. I had taken a train up to London and was supposed to get on an early morning flight from Heathrow. The bus to the airport, however, was cancelled, and I had to make my own way using a series of night buses. However, it was about 2:30 a.m. and my phone was dead, and I had never used London's night buses before. I was young and a little scared, standing in the middle of Victoria trying to figure out the fated bus schedule when a woman came up to me and asked, "Are you all right, love?" And I explained through tears that I thought I was going to miss my flight and didn't even have an Oyster card. She looked up my route on her phone, wrote down all the possible variations of buses and trains that I would need to take, including the times. She waited with me the entire time, like 20 minutes. Then when the bus came up, she paid for my fare, no cash on London buses. I got out and looked to her, and she shrugged and said, "Oh, I'm not getting the bus, you just looked like you needed someone." I was in an abusive relationship, and it ended with him beating me up very badly. Broken ribs, bruises, and cuts all over me. He was arrested, but the process and aftermath was hell. It was spring and the weather was warming, but for weeks I wore long sleeves and high collars to hide the cuts and bruises. Eventually, everything healed and faded except one very deep bruise on my upper arm. I had had enough of hiding them in shame, so one day I said fuck it and wore short sleeves. I was standing in line in Walmart and noticed this rough biker-looking dude staring at me. I thought he was checking me out or whatever. Then he asked me how I got that bruise on my arm. I stumbled answering, and he outright asked, "Did somebody hurt you?" For some reason, I decided to be honest and not lie in shame, so I said out loud, "Yes, somebody hurt me." He looked at me, and in the kindest voice said, "You did not deserve that. Whoever it was will get what's due to them one day." For some reason, that was a turning point for me. I knew then that I was going to be okay. I knew that no matter how things turned out legally, that I was going to be okay. I never saw that man again, but I honestly think he was an angel sent to give me a message. There was a little girl who lived a street away when I was growing up. I think she was around my sister's age. One day, my mom spotted her watching her garden and complimented the tulips before riding off again on her bike. My mom went back inside for something, or maybe to a different part of the garden, but just for a moment. When she got back, she discovered the tulips were gone and spotted the little girl biking away really fast. My mom chased her down, and the girl said she took them because they were pretty. My mom scolded her and said if she'd only asked, my mom would have been happy to cut some tulips for her. She didn't sweat it too much, because they were a poor family with many kids who all got into a lot of trouble around the neighborhood. They were just flowers, after all. A few years later, the girl was diagnosed with leukemia and ended up dying. I think she was 11 or 12. My mom was so troubled by the death she got permission from the family to plant some tulips by her grave so she'd always have the flowers she loved. I moved 1,000 miles away from everything I knew after graduating college 16 years ago. Back then, I was pretty homesick, struggling in my career and figuring things out, so I felt pretty lost in life. One day, I was walking around downtown Orlando when an older man, probably in his mid-80s, stopped me. He handed a piece of paper that he was carrying to me and said, "You seem like a good person with a good heart. It will be all right." Then he just walked away. Looking down, that piece of paper was a copy of a handwritten page by him filled with dozens and dozens of sayings, illustrations, and quotes from all over the world regarding love and hope. Tears came immediately, and I put it away to read later that day. It stayed on my wall in my home for the better part of 10 years until I moved again. Now it's been 16 years since then, and sure, he's moved on to the next world by now. I still have that page, take it out occasionally, and think about that wonderful man from many years ago who taught me about pure and genuine random acts of kindness, right along with love and hope. He was an absolute blessing to me and to our world. Thank you, good sir. You were a beautiful soul. Driving on the highway, the car in front of me suddenly swerved to take an exit, and then tried to swerve back onto the highway, almost sideswiping me in the process. Luckily, there was no one to my left, so I veered into the left lane and avoided an accident. A few moments later, I'm passing her, and she very sheepishly looks up at me, kind of anticipating and expecting someone to cuss her out. Well, I had just learned a new road trip trick. Flipping people off is stupid, but giving them a thumbs down really stays with someone. It's the "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed" of the road. I had a huge-ass thumbs down queued up for this driver, but when I saw her face, I immediately knew she didn't mean to. She was embarrassed, and she already felt bad enough. So instead, I flashed her a huge smile, dramatically and jokingly wiped sweat from my brow and gave her a giant thumbs up. She smiled and laughed, and honestly, it's one of my favorite moments in my life. I miss my great-gramps so much. He died when I was 9. I'm not certain he would have lived another 16, 19 years to see his great-great-grandsons be born, but according to my mom, great-aunt, who only lived to see my eldest son hit 2 years old before she passed, grandma and aunt, the sun rose and set with me, and if he'd lived to have met my boys, he would have gotten the biggest kick out of them, and would have worshipped the ground they walked on. They definitely would have had my great-gramps as their biggest fan, especially my youngest, who is the most empathetic and sweet little guy I know. I was once traveling through an old town when I stopped at a small shop to buy some packaged water. I was in my tweens at that time, so I jumped out of my car and went to buy. A very old man sat at the shop. Once I bought everything, he took out an ice cream and handed it to me. As I was about to take the bottles with me, he picked the bottles himself and walked with me to the car so that I could have my ice cream. He was very old and scaly, very thin too. And once he saw that I had a younger sister, he rushed back to the shop to bring out another ice cream for her. I insisted that he take money for it, but he didn't take it and just smiled. Maybe we reminded him of his grandchildren, I presume. I was in Walmart one day and some dude was blocking the aisle where the item I needed was located. I then heard him ask a Walmart employee where the cabinet liners were. She proceeded to say she wasn't sure and started to send him to the wrong location. I nosily piped up, "I know where they are. If you want to follow me, I will take you to them because I just bought some last week." The man, "Oh, okay, thank you." He followed me to the opposite side of the store and I showed him where they were. He thanked me again, and I hurried back to the other side of the store to get what I needed. 5 minutes later at the self-checkouts, the man showed up, and I saw him just hanging around with his bag of purchases on his arm. When it came time to pay, he stepped up and insisted on paying for my items. I thanked him profusely. At the time, I only had $35 in my bank account and was trying to purchase food for the week. This man who I was so annoyed with helped me so much. I still tear up when I think of his kindness. I am a single mother of 2 wonderful kids, and this was my miracle.